Hello and welcome to Tuntum Network in Accra, Ghana. My name is Cyrus. This is the one-stop media house. You always have the details of the most important topics on the motherland. Here is where we discuss those. Therefore, do me a favor. When you find value on this network, don't forget to subscribe and also click on the bell for all of our videos. That's all I'm asking. Thank you, folks. And now, there are a couple of things that has really gone well for Senegal, which we celebrated on this network. Ladies and gentlemen, Senegal in March of 2024 elected another young president. They continued after their former president, Macky Sall, to elect another young president in office in the person of Bassirou Faye, which is quite different from the common practice of having old men in leadership positions in Africa. And I had a video on that, which went viral, ladies and gentlemen. President Faye, immediately after his swearing in 2024, called for the end of France's permanent military bases on Senegal's soil as part of a push for a full national sovereignty. And by July of 2025, France officially handed over its last two military bases in Senegal. They left. This ended France's 65 years of having permanent military presence in that country. Follow me on this carefully. I'm leading you up to something. Ladies and gentlemen, so President Bassirou Faye had a few good things going on for him until probably the early part of 2025. President Faye ordered the Court of Auditors to review the country's public finances right after taking office. And the court published their findings in February of last year, which brought out a shocking revelation, ladies and gentlemen. In the audited findings, it came out that the previous government had hidden billions in public debts that were not reported on. There was an audited report that was actually handed over to the incoming government by the outgoing government. But this other debt was not stated in that report, ladies and gentlemen. So, with the first official report the new president asked for, it came out that Senegal had $7 billion in previously concealed public debt for the period up to 2023. $7 billion unreported. Then there was a second audit, which the president again asked for, which was supposed to be a run-up to the 2025 budget. That report took the total debt undeclared from $7 billion to $11 and $12 billion, ladies and gentlemen. When this report came out, immediately, Senegal's debt to GDP rose roughly between 119% to 132%. Senegal immediately had more debt to pay in a year than the country's revenue in a year. Ladies and gentlemen, apparently, these debts are owed to four categories of creditors. Four categories. The first group are the multilateral creditors who actually own between 30 to 40% of their debts. And then you have the bilateral creditors. The third is Eurobond and private market investors. And the fourth is the domestic finance creditors. In simple terms, they owe IMF, World Bank, African Development Bank, and others. They also owe China, France, India, South Korea, and Turkey. And finally, Senegal also owe their local banks and capital creditors. Ladies and gentlemen, the publication of this audit made the IMF immediately freeze $1.8 billion, which was a lending program they had arranged with the IMF. This, in effect, has directly led to multiple credit downgrades by major rating agencies. For instance, S&P Global Ratings has moved Senegal's rating from B- to CCC+. Moody's has downgraded Senegal from B to B-. Most of those loans are overdue. Most of them are overdue, and others go as far as 2037. Ladies and gentlemen, this puts Senegal in a very difficult situation. When the loans you have to pay in a year is more than the revenue you generate in a year, that is a huge problem. However, Senegal's prime minister came out recently to say that the country won't need formal debt restructuring despite the heavy payment schedule. He said the loans are manageable. And he needed to say that, ladies and gentlemen, because if it does happen that Senegal goes into a debt restructuring with the IMF, it will be similar to what Ghana went through in the structural adjustment program with the IMF. In such a situation, the IMF will indirectly be running the country. They will determine when to hire, when to lay off, who to lay off, what you can procure and what you can't. They indirectly determine everything that goes on in the country in terms of financial decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, Senegal is, however, still in negotiations with the IMF, even right now. Now, after analyzing the whole thing, I asked myself a single question, which I want to throw to you. Why should $11 or $12 billion be such a problem for Senegal in the first place? Ladies and gentlemen, when you become critical of the circumstances on this continent, you tend to wonder what our leaders have been doing all this while. A whole country, a whole African country endowed with every type of mineral there is in the world, with such a vibrant young population, cannot raise $12 billion on its own. An amount America spends on food stamps in a month is what an African country has been struggling with in nearly 7 years to pay, ladies and gentlemen. You can now understand why the rest of the world looks down on us. Japan spends on the average $3.5 billion on street management and water supply in homes in 1 month. Do your math for the year, how much they spend, and see how much expenditure they have to put up by their government. Yet, a population of 19 million people had to depend on this small loan amount to be sustainable in spite of all the resources they have. We are simply not creating enough wealth on this continent. Our revenues are just too small. $12 billion in loans should never be enough to turn any African country over to a financial institution to manage. Senegal's national revenue for the year 2024 was $6.4 billion only. 2025 went up to a little over $7 billion. This includes all forms of taxes and duties and non-tax receipts at all government levels. This is what the state is working with, $7 billion. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the problem. When you look at all over in Africa, the story is the same. The problem has been how to generate more revenue for the state, because the state has so much to do. And I keep proposing ideas for that purpose, and nobody is listening. If the government of Senegal doesn't go into state agriculture or agribusiness and mining, this problem will never end. Food is always going to be in demand. The state must have its own farms to sell to its people, first of all. The state must have its own farms to sell to the world. The mineral deposits in the land cannot continue to sit there. The state must get involved in mining for the minerals and the processing of them for the world market, ladies and gentlemen. You cannot be a country that produces nothing and be dependent on only taxes to grow. It doesn't make sense. That's never going to work. African leaders will have to understand this. The problem in Africa is not really about the expenditure, because we don't even spend that much, ladies and gentlemen. We are the continent that spends the least. So expenditure isn't really the problem. The problem is revenue generation on the part of the government. If you want to be an African president, take it from me, and you aren't talking about creative ways to raise revenue, nobody should believe you on anything you say. Any politician campaigning on raising revenue by widening the tax net is a loser in the making. Widening the tax net. That's all they know. The people are already don't have enough to spend. What again do you want to take from them? More than half of the people in sub-Saharan Africa don't spend more than $2.15 per day. Don't you know? So what exactly are you trying to take from them? President Faye needs to focus on state businesses that will bring in revenue and not just taxes. The taxes will be bonus. Run the state like you are running a private business. Be competitive. Get involved in industries that has high returns in your country and raise revenue from that. That will be your surest bet, Mr. President. $7 billion in revenue for a country of 19 million population is a joke. We need to be serious as black people, ladies and gentlemen. If Senegal will ever prosper, they should be looking at a double or triple of that revenue continuously for the next 10 years. That's when the roads will be built, hospitals and all the infrastructure the people desperately need will be built. But I'm just an outsider looking in. So I'll end here. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Kindly remember to subscribe and help us grow. We are pretty much close to hitting 100,000 subscribers. Help us get there, please, by the end of this month. My name is Cyrus, and this is Tuntum Network in Accra, Ghana. It is bye-bye for now.